Well, good evening, everyone. I'm pleased to call to order this joint work session of the Arlington County Board and the Arlington School Board. Welcome, colleagues from our school side. It's good to be with you. It's been a while, hasn't it? Yeah, since April, indeed. So tonight, the subject of our conversation is about our joint relationship in working on projections that inform schools' projections of student enrollment and some innovative changes which have been made to our methodologies and our work processes together since the joint since the community facilities study of 2015. So we're excited to share that staff work and to really have a conversation about how this work informs planning on the school side and some larger considerations on the county side. So that's my opening presentation. I invite Chair Tanya Talento to share any opening remarks on behalf of the schools.
Thank you, Mr. Dorsey. I appreciate you having us and hosting our joint work session. And I would just echo what you said. We are actually looking at our collaboration in our data sharing regarding our projections. And we thought that this would be a really good time to share what has developed over the last few years since the community facility study, since we are both entering our CIP processes. And as you know, we are managing school enrollment growth. So thank you for hosting us and for having us. It's always a pleasure to come to the county board and to work with you in our discussions. So thank you.
Terrific. So with that, I think we'll probably turn it over to our county manager and interim superintendent.
First off, I want to welcome the school board members, and especially I want to welcome Cynthia Johnson, acting superintendent. The staff this evening, we're going to have Elizabeth Hardy and Robert Ruiz, who work very closely with each other a lot. Walk through, we had a version of this about 2 years ago where we talked about some of the steps we had taken in response to the community facilities study. They've taken that work, I would say, even to a better and a more interesting and sort of precise level. They have a lot of material to go through. Times it can be dense. I think they've actually put together some slides that are really excellent and will prove to be a really good discussion point. So I'm going to give up my seat for Elizabeth. And if Cynthia, if you want to say anything, you can.
I'd like to just say good evening. Cynthia Johnson, Interim Superintendent. It's great to continue the partnership with the county, and I'm going to give my seat up to Robert Ruiz.
Okay. With that set up and with the seats being warm, Elizabeth, Robert, welcome.
Hello, good evening. Thank you for having us here. It's really a pleasure to be able to talk about our work and what we do. Everyone doesn't get that opportunity, so I think this is a great opportunity, and we're happy to share how we've been working together over the last, 4 years now, coordinating all of this information. So if you remember, the community facility study started in 2015. And the community facility study, they were tasked with evaluating Arlington's changing facility needs. Yep.
Excuse me, Elizabeth, we've
Yes.
got a hum, so I just want to make sure. Anybody have any phones or anything near their devices? Try that. Okay, let's give it another try.
Is that any better? No.
It's maybe your microphone. Huh.
Let's share. Is that better? Yeah. So we're good at sharing. We'll share the microphone too. Right. So the community facility study, they were tasked with evaluating Arlington's changing facility needs due to the changing population. That started in 2015. And it continued to 2017. We had consultants on board to review Arlington's population and employment forecast and also APS's student projection. They reviewed both methodologies and reinforced the validity of both methods. They also confirmed that there needs to be two different methods because they're for two different purposes. And then they recommended short and long-term improvements for how we can share data and how we can really make our two projections and forecasts really talk to each other. So this is just a timeline to show you, starting 2015 to 2017, that was the community facility study, phase 1 and phase 2, ending in 2017. And since then, ACG, county side and the school side, has been working together sharing data. Our last forecast that we produce, forecast 9.1, was done in July 1st, 2017. And that fed into APS projections into September 30th. So just looking at this, our whole data collection and forecast and projection process is actually a 6-month process. It takes half the year to do this. We start gathering our data and collecting it in July. We hand it over to APS at the end of September, and then Robert and his team takes it and they produce the student projections in December. So that's 6 months of work just to produce the annual APS projections. So every year we have the opportunity to review and evaluate and make any changes and improvements to the projections or any updates. We do a review and we see what worked, what didn't work, how can we change what we're doing to make it even better. So we do that every year. So when we're not working on the data, we're actually meeting to understand how can we improve the process. I just want to take a couple moments and talk about our forecast process because it's the basis for what we do. We take housing units and we apply factors to turn them into households. So we use occupancy factors to change a household to a housing unit to a household, and then a household to population by using average household size. And then this was a quote from one of the reports based on RLS demographics when they reviewed our methodology. I'm just going to read the quote. It said, "The housing unit method is an acceptable methodology and is especially effective in areas with high quality data on housing development and changes." So our ACG forecast is a land use model. As I said before, it's based on housing units, which we turn to households, population, and then also jobs. It's a 30-year period and broken down in 5-year increments. We are part of Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments cooperative forecasting process, where we work with the region, so our forecasts are calibrated at a regional level as well. The population forecast is based on the 2010 census total population count. So after we get to 2020 census population, our forecast will be updated to reflect that. And then for forecasting the population, we use estimates and apply factors to projects that are currently under construction, approved not under construction, and then areas in which we could have higher density than what is there now, or land use change. In terms of variables that go into the forecast, the housing unit occupancy and average household size, we use the 2010 census as a base, and again, this would be updated from 2020 data. And then each variable is derived based on the areas listed below, those 12 areas, and then the rest of the county together. And for guidance for our forecast, we use the density and land use that is determined by the county board, adopted and approved documents such as the general land use plan, zoning ordinance, sector, and small area plans. And all this is possible because of our development tracking. We have a process where we track development and release these reports. If you don't get these reports, please sign up for them. They come out on a quarterly and annual basis where we track all development going on in the county, and we've had this data going back to the year 2000. So we were able to develop trends and snapshots and understand what's really going on with development in the county. And as you can see, housing units, this is the net housing unit growth since 2010. and it varies every year. So all of that is taken into account when we do the forecast. So ACG and APS implemented a methodology that links the population forecast to the student projections, and we did this by using housing units and bursts, and this is an outcome from the community facility study. There are three main pieces of data that we share. The first one is the Master Housing Unit database, and that database combines administrative data from real estate, from housing, and from our development tracking to create one database and data set of all housing units in the county. The housing unit forecast actually takes our cooperative forecast, that 5-year forecast, and breaks it down to an annual basis. So we're able to give APS the housing unit growth on a yearly basis. And then actual and projected births. We get from the state actual births from Arlington residents, and then we project births based on the population forecast and using a separate model. So just looking at this, this is the housing unit database overview. This was first developed in 2015 by our team, where we, again, combined data sources, administrative data sources to make this one complete data set of all housing. In this data set, we designate different apartment complexes by affordability type. Is it market rate, is it cap only, or is it a mix of market and cap units? And we also use this data, and APS uses this data to calculate the student generation factors by housing type, which then are applied to future housing to estimate student yields. When we're going through the site plan process, we use this to understand how many students could come from new development. And then the housing unit forecast, like I said before, this is derived by the forecast, cooperative forecast. Our latest forecast is around 9.1, and that's produced as of July 1st, 2017. It was officially adopted by COG in the fall of 2018. APS, we produce a special housing unit forecast for APS by taking that data, looking at what has happened between when that forecast was created in 2017 and what's going on now. And then look at that in the 5-year increments and base that out based on absorption and look at that in a 1-year period. So we do that every September and supply that to APS. And then the data for actual births, we get that from the state, Virginia Department of Health. We also geocode that and we provide that to APS. And projected births are estimated by integrated this cohort component model with the population model to produce 5-year population forecasts and births. So the cohort component model looks at births, deaths, and migration and understands how population is changed by that and actually produces an estimated number of births coming from the population change. So a couple things have changed since we updated the cohort, since the community facility study cohort component model was created. We had the around 9.1 updated and adopted by COG. Fertility rates change, and migration rates have also changed. So the updated birth forecasts have been recalibrated with the model, and now will be available in October 2019. And then they'll be used in the upcoming enrollment projections as well.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I'm Robert Ruiz with APS Planning and Evaluation. So there are factors that we look at when we look at calculating and doing enrollment projections. So one of the factors is the fact that our incoming kindergarten cohorts have been bigger relative to the graduating 12th grade cohorts over time. That's been a recent trend that's likely to continue. Another factor that we consider is actual and projected birth. And again, as Elizabeth mentioned, that's one area where we cooperate together with those forecasted births. Another factor that we consider is continued housing growth. And again, that's another factor that through the community facility studies that we work together and use that information in our enrollment projections. Another factor contributing to growth is migration of families in and out of the county. And that's embedded within the projected county birth information. So that's something that we also consider. So just to illustrate that fact, this chart sort of shows those trends that are contributing to enrollment growth. So the blue lines actually show our enrollment by grade from September 30th of this year. And then it compares it with the bars in gray to the right. And those are our 12th grade cohorts of September from recent years, from 2015 to 2018. And the green bars to the left are actually our projected forecasted kindergarten incoming cohorts. Those numbers come from the projections that we did last year from last fall, and which we're updating currently. But the thing to note is that to the right, looking at those gray bars, you see that from 15 on to 18, those 12th grade cohorts over time have been increasing. But when you compare them with the projected incoming kindergarten cohorts, or even our existing kindergarten from 2019 or first graders, those are relatively bigger. And as those students age through our APS system, through our schools, and they transition from like kindergarten to first to second, et cetera, all the way to high school, they're going to be, relatively speaking, larger than our existing 12th grade cohorts and our recently graduated 12th grade cohorts. Elizabeth mentioned that we did updates this fall to those birth projections. And just to illustrate this fact, this chart sort of shows how we use that birth information and what grades it, or what cohorts it impacted in the last projection round. So this chart looks at projected kindergarten students, actuals and projected. So the gray bars are actual kindergarten students from 2013 to 2018. And then the gold bars, or orange bars, are projections for incoming kindergarten students from 2019 to 2028-29. So in last year's enrollment projections, the incoming kindergarten cohorts from 2019 to 2021 were based off of actual births that occurred between 2014 and 2016. We calculate a certain average of those births, X percentage, we expect to enter APS schools. From 2022 to 2028, in last year's enrollment projections, those kindergarten cohorts were based off of the projections of birth that we received from Arlington County.
Mr. Chair, just make sure I'm understanding. So this is after you adjusted the data based on the results of the study you received in fall?
No.
This is unadjusted?
Yes, this is unadjusted. Okay. So that's a good question. So those enrollment projections will be released in mid-month, this month. So right now I'll be presenting background information, and most importantly, the work from adjusting or recalibrating the model that produces those birth forecasts. But in terms of the actual, what those numbers yield in terms of overall projections, again, that won't be released publicly until mid-December. So sorry for the text heavy slide, but because this is such a change and it is so important to the enrollment projections, we thought kind of explaining it would do it justice, of the recent work that we undertook with RLS Consulting. So this fall, RLS Demographics was contracted to update the Arlington County Birth Forecast Model, which is known as the Cohort Projection System. So the last time this model was updated was in 2016. Comparisons of forecasted and actual births for 2017 and 2018 showed that births were overestimated in the forecast model. And so, as Elizabeth said, we both work together. Every summer and fall, we meet to re-examine the projections from last year, what the trends are looking currently. And that's one area that we noticed we needed to take a look and recalibrate the model because the differences, there were differences between those projections and the actual birth that Arlington experienced. So RLS demographics update of the birth forecast includes the latest Arlington County government population forecast, the cooperative forecast known as round 9.1, updated analysis of age-specific fertility rates using 2010 to 2018 historical birth data, and U.S. Census Bureau estimates of the distribution of the female population by age. And again, the 2016 model didn't benefit from that more current data up to 2018. The RLS's work also looked at the updated analysis of age-specific migration using U.S. Census Bureau estimates up to July 1, 2018. And again, it bears repeating, the new recalibrated model was benefiting from data that the old model could not use or wasn't privy to. Some key findings that informed the updated birth model. It was found that the total fertility rate, known as a TFR, from 2010 to 2015 was 1.44 and is estimated to decline to 1.34 in the 2015 to 2020 period. So fertility rates, with RLS's analysis, were found to have gone down, and as they extrapolated up to the year 2020, they were going further down. As well as there is a reduced level of in-migration for the 20 to 24 and 25 to 29 age groups compared with the 26 model. And so that's important as well because there's less of that population, to be of birth giving years. So what does all that mean? So this chart looks at 3 data points: actual birth, the birth that we forecasted last year, and the birth that RLS demographics, the recent update and recalibration of the model, their new birth estimates going forward. So the gray line is the actual birth. The gold lines are the births that were forecast that we used last year, and the green bars represent the births that we're currently using in the draft enrollment projections that we're working on. If you look at year 2017, you see that there's a difference where the gold bar is higher than the gray line. That means that the birth in that year were over-projected or overestimated. By 2018, that difference increases. And again, that's what prompted Elizabeth and I to work with RLS and look at recalibrating the model. As you look at 2019 through 2023, you see that there's a variance, there's a difference between what we had forecasted for last year and what we're going to be using in the current projections. So by year 2023, that difference is that the new projected births are around 1,000 less forecasted births for that year. As Elizabeth mentioned, we also cooperate in sharing information about new housing. So this table represents inputs that we're going to be using in the draft enrollment projections that we're using currently. So overall, from July 2019 to the end of July, and through calendar year 2020 through 2029, Elizabeth has estimated that the county will have around 15,581 net new units. And it's important to say net new because this is not replacement units. These are units that are above and beyond what we currently have. So this chart shows some of the assumptions that we had last year versus the ones that we're incorporating in the current enrollment projections model. One thing that you'll notice is that for 2018 period represents July to the end of calendar year 2018. For that, in terms of our projections that we had last year, we did factor in more housing construction than actually was delivered. So net new was 127. In terms of, and it's important to note that, because construction does impact the enrollment projections, for years like 2019 to 2020, one of the differences that we'll be showing when those enrollment projections are released is that the impact of housing construction will be more pronounced in the later half of 2019, from July to the end of the calendar year, and 2020 than had been previously estimated last year. Again, the green bars represent the new housing estimates, and the gold bars represent what we used last year. And so for 2019, we had estimated something less than the 1,300 units that we're now expecting will be delivered. And that becomes even more pronounced by 2020. So for us, the estimating the number of new housing is important, but more importantly, or as importantly, is understanding what the impact will be to schools in terms of students. So every new unit that's developed is a potential household with children and a APS student. So now that we've had 2 years of looking at comparing that housing unit data inventory that Elizabeth mentioned, matching it with actual students, and from there calculating student generation rates for each of the neighborhood school boundaries as well as county-wide, we can begin creating comparisons that are actual apples-to-apples comparisons on how student generation rates are changing over time. So in that table, the first line in gray represents the new student generation rates that we'll be applying for the current enrollment projections that we're working on. The second gray row shows the student generation rates that were calculated for last year and that were applied to last year's enrollment projections. And the third row shows the difference. So there was some variation. In some cases, the rate went slightly up. In other cases, it went slightly down. One thing that we did want to stress as well is that there are some rates that are seemingly high, for example, for a CAF multifamily elevator. But when you look at what it represents in terms of the housing stock, it's less than 1% of the total housing stock. So that's something to bear in mind as these numbers are being looked at. So in terms of, we receive all these data from the county that we use in our enrollment projections, but looking at what their impact is for the enrollment projections. This chart looks at the enrollment projections from last year. And one of the things that we wanted to show was the fact that there are certain years for which the elementary projections are based completely on assumptions. And so those are likely to change as we reassess that birth information. So starting in 2024-25, the kindergarten to grade 5 elementary school enrollment projections are completely based on assumptions regarding birth, future construction, and also another factor that I didn't mention earlier, but we also look internally at our administrative data for students, and we create factors by school on ratios for how many students are likely to transition from one grade to another. But that third bullet point means to explain that we assume that those trends will continue into the future. And again, I'll just stress this, that those of the elementary projections are the ones that are most likely to be impacted by those recalibrated birth model, because as you can see, so many years of the projection years are impacted by those key assumptions. At the middle school level, because so many of the students that we're calculating or for those middle school enrollment projections are already in our school system, and we can rely on those administrative records, there's more certainty in terms of the enrollment trends and that trajectory. So looking at last year's enrollment projections, starting in 2027-28, the grade 6 to 8 middle school enrollment projections are completely based on assumptions from births, future construction, and past cohort transition rates continuing into the future. And so that's one area where, as we're working on the draft enrollment projections, we don't foresee a lot of difference between what we projected last year and what we're working on currently, partially because so much of the factors are already known, mainly the administrative records of students. And this is especially true at the high school level. So starting in 2028-29, the grade 9 high school enrollment projections are completely based on assumptions from birth, future construction, and past cohort transition rates continuing into the future. So again, for high school, there's a fair amount of certainty because, again, so many of the students and the cohorts, as we're aging them, are already in the system. So we don't have to rely so much on making an assumption about the births occurring at a point in time and aging those students forward. So in terms of the timeline for the enrollment projections and how they'll be used in the next couple of months. So as I mentioned earlier, by mid-December, Arlington Public Schools will be publishing those updated enrollment projections for the 2021 through 2028-29 timeframe. In January 2020, updates to the permanent seat capacity inventory reflecting refinements to schools' permanent seat capacity and the 2019 10-year projections will be released. And that's one of those key tables that shows capacity utilization, and that's used, will be used in the CIP process. And then in February 11, 2020, the school board will have a work session where we'll be updating them on the 10-year projections and as that relates to the CIP.
And this is your PSA of the night. The 2020 census is coming. Everyone counts. It's important for fair representation and also federal funding. Arlington receives over $50 million on an annual basis from federal funding that's just related to census data. And we have our two liaisons here from each board, and we thank you for all of your support and help. But, it's really important that we all keep working together on this and get a complete count because, as we heard tonight, our school projections and our population projections are based on the census, and so is so much that we do here in the county. So, again, your PSA, make sure everyone gets counted in 2020.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hardy and Mr. Ruiz. Appreciate the thorough presentation of your work thus far, and I think we're now ready to have some conversation with questions from anyone who seeks to raise one. Mr. DeFerranti, I see you moving towards the button.
So first, just thank you both for all your work. It's all of us know how persistent the questions on projections have been over the past 5 years, and so not everybody is aware of your great work, but just a big thank you on that. And then I wanted just to, maybe it could be a question for you or maybe the school board, slide 24 or slide 23 on, it has been etched, thank you, Ms. Cannon and others, into my mind, the number 2400, which is 2472 is the actual number here, but it's unclear, but I suppose it's possible that based on the updated January projections, that number would come down below 2400. Is that a fair?
We're still working on that draft, but I will say that the working draft that we have currently, the elementary numbers are there's still an increase, but it's not as pronounced as what we projected last year.
Great, okay, that's helpful. I just wanted to track. I may have other questions, but that's a first. Thanks.
So if I can go into another question regarding the census, so at what point will the census do their work of finishing data that will allow it to form a subsequent update? When should we be looking at another substantial shift in the quality of the projections that we're able to make?
So we should have 2020 census data back by 2021, July. And we have to go through the whole reviewing the process, making sure
6
it's
months,
all,
right?
yeah. So fingers crossed we'll be able to incorporate it that next year into some of the base stuff we do. But we also have to go through the cooperative forecasting process with COG, so that might take a little longer to get it updated in the base as well.
Thank you.
And the updated census data will be used in a third update to that, the model that produces the birth forecast, because it will be important for the assumptions that are made in that model for in and out migration, as well as the age of the female population in the county.
Terrific. You know, since it'll be difficult for me to tell whether lights are on the other side, if you all could do something like maybe turn your placard, I don't think they'll stand up. Find some other way
Wave
of
it.
letting me know that you'd like to speak, and that'll be good. All right. Mr. Goldstein.
Thank you. I guess my method worked. So I have a question I'd like to get some clarity on, but then I have a discussion item. So if you want to wait until we get to the discussion item part rather than the clarifying questions,
Yeah,
I
why
can
don't we,
hold
why
it
don't we
till
do
then.
questions, and then we can get into some
Okay.
open-ended discussion. Sure.
So my question is, if you go to slide 17, and actually this one might work also. Yeah, okay. So we learned that the projections beyond a certain point are based on, beyond the point that we have birth rates, we have projections based on a cohort progression model or something like that?
Yeah, so for example, in last year's projections from 2019 to 2023, those projections were done based off looking at records for students that we have in the APS system, making assumptions about how they'll likely transition by school from one grade to another.
Right.
In those years, we were also factoring in assumptions, for example, the impact from new housing to each school at all the grade levels. But it's by 24, 25, at least in this slide for elementary, when there are no administrative records that you could use at that point. And so at that point, it's all based on assumptions.
Right, okay, so at that point, because we're beyond the point of having actual birth records that we can then, look 5 years down the road to when they become kindergartners, would it be useful to have confidence percentages for the projections for those years, that are beyond the point that we have actual birth or even housing projection data for? So that we can look at, I think it's assumed that the farther out you project, the squishier the projection number is. Is it possible to apply some kind of confidence?
That's something we can, I mean, it's worth exploring, and we can talk to Dr. Richard Grip, who's been advising me on the enrollment projections work. He's the consultant who was contracted as part of the community facility studies to work with Elizabeth and I as we work together on both feeding the assumptions on the projections and working on the projections. So that's certainly true. And I know in talking to him that, we've discussed the fact that in those outer years, yes, there is the level of confidence does decline over time. Same thing as you go smaller scale. So yes, definitely worth exploring.
Thank you. Dr. Cannonen.
Echoing what Mr. DiFronti said, first of all, this really is great work. And I'm reminded of 5 years ago when I joined the board, and that was, of course, before this work was kind of put in motion. And our two boards at that point really had different perceptions of what our enrollment growth path was going to look like. And so among the many innovations and improvements we've made, we can now all look at the same information and agree across our boards on what things look like, understanding that things are going to adjust and change, but at least we have that basic agreement, understanding of what we think is happening with our school enrollment. And to that end, I want to ask also about a prediction end of this, which is I'm also recalling that, again, 5 years ago, we knew where we were and we had our projections, and then there was this, well, at some point it's going to peak out, and how much should we build now because we're probably going to hit the peak soon. And because we really didn't know, we didn't have that kind of projection for how. And over time, I think we've kind of projected a different peak. It was 28,000 students, then it was 30, and then it was 32, and I'm not quite sure if it's a higher number now, but that's basically my question is, what do we know now about our overall growth and what it means for when the population in the county and in our schools might peak out? Or do we know?
So in our draft projections, definitely there is an impact from those key birth assumptions. And if you look at the slide, I'm forgetting the number for showing the slide 19. Let me go there. You'll notice that there is a subtle slight decline in the number of projected births. So it definitely, that subtle decline will have an impact, a bearing on especially those outer years of the projections, and most pronounced at the elementary level.
And is that sort of an agreed upon point then, that we might hit a peak and start heading the other?
If we could check on that and get back to you, I think with the new birth projections, we might have had some numbers run by age group for the future years. So the nice thing about the cohort component model is that it takes our population forecast and breaks it down by age, which we just don't have the ability to do that, but this cohort component model does. So that would, I think, answer your question about when would the under 18 population really reach its peak, or under, the elementary school reach its peak in the county. So we can go back and look at that data and see if it's part of the new data that we got from RLS demographics and get back to you on that.
Yeah, I mean, I want to talk about this a little more at the discussion point too, because I think the whole point of this becomes really understanding what our long-term needs will be. Because if we actually have a sense of when and how big that, where we're going to be at the point of that peak, we'll really know what we need to build. No matter whether we're right on the timing or not, we'll know that long-term.
Incredibly useful discussion, even discuss whether you should be thinking about natural peaks, but let's get there and make sure we have room for any questions. Mr.
Oh,
Ruiz?
and if I could add that even if the population continues increasing, you could have, something different happening with births and with schools just because of those varying fertility rates. And, one of the key findings from RLS was the in and out migration impact by age. So if the population is more skewed toward one end of the spectrum, and you're getting less in migration or more in migration, could go both ways. That could have a bearing as well. So it's very dynamic.
Ms. Crystal.
Yeah, I think I'm interested maybe to follow up with just one question on that. I think this is a great example of how, because our jobs are different, we think about things differently, which is to say, if we were talking about when is Arlington County's population going to start declining, that might be worrisome, right? That's to us, right? When we think about that would be a sign of a community in decline, that people are leaving. It makes sense. Your job is different. You're thinking about, and that I wonder maybe tracks a little bit more towards, sort of generational distribution in the United States, which we know is going to have peaks and valleys, right? You can still have a healthy, thriving community, but its generational distribution is changing. So I'm glad you surfaced that. It took me a second to get my head around it. Do we know, is there anything that you can share about, I actually don't know, sort of post-echo boom, right? Maybe the echo boom. Do we know about kind of what the general distribution of the generation after those that are currently in schools look like nationally? I mean, are we seeing bulges? Are we seeing
Nice passing me the microphone. Let me get back to you on that because I don't want to say something that's not correct.
Yeah. That actually wasn't my question, but I am now interested, or why I put my light on rather, and now I'm interested to know. I wanted to ask a little bit about the land use model on slide 5, and wanted to ask if you could unpack a little more for us about the 5-year increments, and what that means with projects under construction or approved and areas that could be redeveloped with greater development potential.
Sure. So the 5-year increments means that our forecast is developed, the last one in round 9.1 was developed for a year range of 2015 to 2045, and it's produced in 5-year increments. So we have 2015 to 2020, 2020, 2025, 25 to 30, and so on. So that's for our purposes, it works great. For APS, not so much. So that's why we take a look at that forecast. We start with that as the base, and we look at what development has occurred since then and what has been approved by the county board to see, okay, if we have this base in 2017, what has changed since that time? And what adjustments do we need to make? What did we think was going to come in and hasn't? What has started construction? What hasn't started construction? What has come back in for another approval? What has changed its use? So all these things are taken into consideration in that 1-year or housing unit forecast that we produce. So for the forecast that we produce around 9.1, you asked about, I think this next slide actually might be a little better to talk about the guidance that we use in terms of future development. So we look at, we use our development tracking system. We understand what's under construction, what is approved, not under construction yet, and we time that out in the forecast. But we also look at areas because that doesn't, what's currently under construction or what's been approved doesn't capture the whole county. And we have these great plans that have been approved and adopted, so we use them. For example, we take the Roslyn sector plan and look at that and say, okay, well, this is what it's called for in terms of land use. How does that relate to what's there right now? If the forecast was updated, how will we accommodate the plan in our forecast? So that's where some of the more of the art comes into the forecast. And it's looking, we talk with planners. We take 2 months and actually do those discussions with planners to understand what's probably going to be coming online, what have they heard from developers, and that kind of that inside, what do we think is going to be happening. But the key is it has to be approved by the county board for us to include that extra bonus density, because that's very important. So in terms of areas that we find that there could be more density than what's there now, we look at the general land use plan and zoning and sector and area plans to decide how much density that could be. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, let me see if I could give a specific example, right? We approved a couple months ago a big project in Roslyn that included some hotel space, but also a tower of residential.
Right.
That was consistent with the realized Roslyn sector plan. So is it fair to say then that the student generation of that tower that the board did not approve until 2019, but was consistent with the plan adopted in 2015, had made their way already into the school's projections?
It may have made its way in some form, but if there was extra bonus density, that might not have been there.
Interesting. Okay.
So, but it's kind of difficult to think about. So if you think of it project basis, it's done that way. But if you think of it county-wide, we calibrate it for absorption. So we're looking at those absorption rates about how much happens on an annual basis and everything. So it is captured in the forecast, and then the forecast that we give APS, it just project-wise, it gets a little little different.
Absolutely. That's just so helpful. I think it sort of can't be underscored enough. We often, I know there is broadly a sense sometimes in the community that every new project we add or approve is, however many more students that weren't included in the forecast, that weren't included in the CIP. And so really explicating, in some cases, maybe with the bonus density, they weren't. And project by project, that's going to be a handful of students. But on balance, that growth is already planned for.
Correct. And then, since we update this every year, once that gets approved, that goes into our approval side, and we make sure that that's incorporated. And it takes about, 4 years before that approval really gets, occupied, if it's moving, So we do have some time from once that project is approved to once it would have students in it as well.
But for my public service announcement, I'll say that while it may mean that it was accounted for in the aggregate, less bonus density, we didn't know where. So, what that would feed into in terms of a specific school boundary construct, that's an ever-present challenge. All right, why don't we go on this side? Anyone?
Fine questions. I did have a clarifying question. Could you tell me what MWCOG stands for?
Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments?
And they have to adopt? Can you explain a little bit
Sure.
about that process so
Sure.
that I understand how ththe numbers filter through to us?
Sure, so that's our regional, what do we call it, Council of Governments, MPO. We're a little different in this area because we have Virginia, Maryland, and DC. Some places only have to deal within their own state. So we all come together and we produce a forecast. Each jurisdiction is responsible for submitting their own totals, but a COG creates this econometric model where they look at the whole region. And when they get everyone's information back from each jurisdiction, they calibrate it with the econometric model and make sure we fall within a certain percentage of that model. So it's kind of like a checks and balances to make sure no jurisdiction forecasts too much or too little. I think we are probably more on the, rational side, conservative side for jurisdictions when we do our forecast because we make sure that we have all those checks and balances when we do it.
Well, that's very helpful. I could figure out the COG, but I wasn't sure what the MW stood for, so thank you. And then the other question I had is, in slide, let me see if I can find it. It's the slide where you broke down the housing units. Yes, I think that's the one. Yes. I noticed that in the single-family detached, you noted the number 3, that's 3 new units that were built. So the question, and I think I've asked this before when we've done this kind of work, we have a lot of older homes that are rebuilt, but they're rebuilt to fit twice as many people in those homes. Those are not accounted for in this new build, is that correct?
So the single-family detached is accounted for in the population base in the model, and we do put that in our housing unit forecast that we do. We do a random allocation for single-family homes based on averages. So that goes into that population side and our population estimates, and then that runs to project the burst.
It's caught from another angle versus the new
It's caught from another angle, but in terms of net new housing, we average a net new
We don't have a lot of land.
between 20 and 30 units.
Right.
And that's really hard to pinpoint that for the future in terms of by right development, in terms of where it's going to go. So it's kind of caught on the back end.
That's helpful. I know that a lot of the questions that we get from this is, well, there's a lot of building, but they're not catching it. But we are catching it, it's just from a different perspective of this work. We're not catching it from new builds. And the 3 represents, there were 3 new homes built where there was no homes before. Is that correct? In the single family
Those
detached.
those are a forecast of 3 homes
Forecasted.
that will be built in 2023. It's
Did not
actually,
exist before.
they were approved by the board. Honeysuckle Hills is the development, so there's 3 of them.
Okay.
And that's where we put what year. But if
Okay.
if they don't get built, then you'll see that 3 move
Okay,
back.
so this is helpful. So because as I think Katie noted this, is we're looking at this from very different lenses. So when I'm looking at this, I'm thinking, okay, how many kids are coming from all this new build? I mean, that's really the one thing I look at. You're probably looking at, this is just our housing inventory. So, I say, okay, well, I know that there's actual single-family detached homes being rebuilt on a regular basis, which are producing more kids, especially if they were an older home where this, it was someone who'd owned it for 30 years, and now a new family's coming in, rebuilding, and, providing. So I just appreciated that clarification, and that's very helpful. Thank you.
So one of the reasons of why we look at those student generation rates every year is to pick up any changes in trends. So we do the student generation rates by neighborhood school boundaries. So if a neighborhood or a school boundary is experiencing a lot of neighborhood turnover of their single family stock or any part of its housing stock, it will be captured in the student generation rates. And we also capture it in the cohort transition rates for the schools, which we also calculate every single year with every new student cohort coming in. So if there is a lot of some impact from housing turnover, those cohort transition rates we would expect to go up. And so we would be applying that and basing that as an assumption for future years going forward. So it's a different way of getting at it than just looking at purely at housing.
No, thank you. That's very helpful. And then I have one just last, I just want to confirm and reiterate that the data we're looking at in this PowerPoint is based on last September's numbers, actual enrollment numbers, 9/30/2018, and those projections. So I know that the community knows we had our enrollment numbers in September 2019. That will be provided with the new updated information, but it's not reflected in this. This is
Correct.
data that is a year old, per se.
So some of the data we're going to be using in the current enrollment projections. So for example, the net new housing slide, that's new information that we're going to be incorporating, but all the numbers that refer to students in future years, enrollment in future years, that's all from last year. And again, we won't be releasing the new numbers until mid-month.
But the new numbers will reflect this year's data.
Yes, that'll
Okay,
incorporate all those new
great.
assumptions.
Thank you.
Okay, back on this side to Ms. Garvey.
Thank you. This is always so incredibly complex. I'm so impressed. And I think my general sort of comments and questions come in the bucket of assumptions. And I think I figured out the answer actually sort of listening to all this. So many, many years ago, generations ago, when I first got involved in the school system, there was always a drop-off from elementary to middle school because when the kids were out of elementary school, they moved out for the good schools to Fairfax. And you could see it in the numbers. I think schools are better. That's not happening so much anymore. So I assume then there was an assumption, but it was built in because you'd look at the numbers and see. So you didn't go as to the why do people do it. You just saw that that's what happened, right? And then for going forward, this whole fertility thing, I've been reading lately that people aren't having children like they used to, probably because it's so incredibly difficult to raise children in this country. That's my guess. But you don't worry about that either. You just look at what the numbers are. And the other story that I hear from people is, I can't afford to live here if I have a family, we're moving out. So that, again, we get at the age you start to see people move out. And you don't think so much why, but that's what you get. So, okay, because I'm always sort of thinking, why are people doing what they're doing? So, and I think you're right. You can only go by the numbers. You can't pretend that, okay, good, I see Elizabeth smiling at me and nodding her head. So one question that I've often asked, and I think we can't do this either. So a building that I looked at in Roslyn, they were doing the Bartlett, I think the 795 units, largest multifamily we've ever had. And I was looking at the plans, and I said, so how many children are there going to be in here? And that was like, they flip 15, and I'm kind of like, whoa, okay. And I'm sure that's the generation. I suspect there are places in the world where a building like the Bartlett would have a lot of children in it. That's my guess. But we don't now. But one day we might, because people would start to change what they're doing. I guess we don't think about that much, because what we'll start to do is we'll just start to see the change, and then we'll just change with the generation factor, and that's how we're going to catch up, right?
So when we do the student generation rates, we'll do them for elementary, middle, high, and we'll do them by different school boundaries. So wherever the Bartlett fell in terms of elementary, middle, and high, we would apply its unique rate for that unit type. And another thing that we look at that you can see there is the affordability component to it. So if it's market rate, mixed income, or 100% committed affordable, there's a rate for that one too, and they're all unique to that specific boundary area.
Great.
And so it follows the trends that are local to that area.
Yeah, okay, that's great. So that makes me feel, because I worry that we don't understand why people are doing what they're doing. What if they change it? But I can see now how the whole formula math kind of catches it up, and you wouldn't want to go on your guesses as to why people do things, although that's what I think about a lot, because that's kind of my job. Anyway, so it gives me more confidence that we kind of have the numbers, but we could have some big swings sometimes if suddenly people start behaving differently. But we'll figure it out.
Only
Okay.
if they all start doing it at the same time.
Exactly.
All right. Ms. O'Grady.
Okay. Thank you. And I think I just want to build on what Ms. Garvey just spoke about, because sometimes we hear from our families that we are underestimating how many people are actually going to be living in an apartment. And if you take a look at your generation factors here, and these are for new units, but I'm just wondering, what do we tell people when they say, oh, you are underestimating how many people are going to be living in apartments? Because if we go back to the slide that Ms. Talento was speaking about earlier, where we show that there's 3 new single-family houses, there's tons of multifamily high-rises coming. And so if we're off even a little bit there, we could have a big swing. And so, that's a concern that we do hear from some of our families.
That's understandable. When we APS and the county work together in terms of whenever there's a site plan that the county's considering for approval, we do get the site plan, and there's a form that APS fills out in terms of estimating the number of students. And the number of student impact from new housing, again, will differ, because the trends that we see in terms of how many students will be generated by a building will differ in different parts of the county. So I think that's one way that we're trying to build transparency about the impact. And same thing with our enrollment projections. One key data piece that we provide with every enrollment, since last year with the enrollment projections report, it's a list of all the buildings that we projected and assumed in our enrollment projections, as well as the student yield, so that we're being fully transparent as to what assumptions are going in terms of new construction.
Okay, Mr. DeFerranti.
Slides 23, I still just want to, I think Ms. Talento's point about currently the build is off 2018 numbers, and those will be updated, as I understand it, in January.
This mid-month.
Mid-month, okay, got it. So, and am I remembering correctly that last year it's better to, the estimates were a couple hundred students or 100 students more than actually showed up? Is that sound right?
I'd have to get back to you on the exact number,
That's all right.
but some of that could have been related to the housing assumptions that we were making, as well as those, for outer years in the projections,
Sure.
those kindergarten assumptions.
Got it. And then we don't know preliminarily on 19 whether the estimate, our projection and our estimates are kind of right on, or if we were a little high in our projection as opposed to the actual number of students who showed.
I can get back to you on that.
Okay.
If we had an update a couple of board meetings ago, I think we were under what we projected this year as well. I don't remember quite, I think it was maybe around 400, 500, but it probably would be good to get confirmation.
Sure. Thanks.
All right, Mr. Goldstein, would you like to surface your discussion question?
Thank you very much. And before I do, I want to recognize that we have one of our students here, middle school student, who's doing a project on citizenship that's requiring her to attend county board meetings and school board meetings.
Encouraging her to attend?
Double credit for tonight, yeah. Yeah, write that down. Sure, she wants to pass that to her teacher. So welcome. So my question, with a fair bit of intro. You folks, the county board, can only approve increased residential density in certain places, in certain zoning districts, largely along the major transportation corridors. And of course, you know, those corridors, those areas are clustered, and the impact is on certain schools whose growth is driven by the additional residential units, in addition to other things, but specifically in those areas, growth, the additional residential units provide that extra growth factor. So this causes disparities in things like capacity utilization, staffing, trailers, new students, expansion plans, boundary changes, bus routes, et cetera, when comparing those schools impacted by the board's approvals versus those schools who are not impacted by it. So this necessarily focuses our attention on certain schools. And when addressing those, we only have three problems. We have no place to build. We don't have enough money to build enough. And we have a timeline to bring new schools online that's much longer than the rate of growth, than the growth impact. So my discussion question is, what options do we all see for this situation? And I can, you know, we can all have a few that just roll off the top of our heads. We do more frequent boundary changes. We have more money for expansion. We build bigger schools. We're planning for new schools, you know, when there are new sector and area plans. And there, I'm sure there are more than I've just jotted down, but I'd like to throw that discussion item out there.
Okay, so it's the existential question, so I'm sure we'll have a robust discussion on it. Anybody want to kick off a response? Well, I mean, I will. You know, I know that we're going to, you know, begin having conversations about identifying the true universe of places where we could site school facilities, because I believe one of the common conversations we've had in our community is that, you know, we're 25.8 square miles, we can't build anything, and that's not entirely true. You know, you don't think of uses of land as static. They are dynamic and can evolve and can be retrofitted to accommodate different needs than exist there currently. So without identifying anything in particular, as you think about a site, for example, that's currently occupied by a, you know, community center in a, you know, for lack of a better phrase, a sprawled layout that is ready for reinvestment. And you can think about a more efficient use of that land and co-locating it with a school facility. You can think about other areas that are primed for reinvestment that could either better be purposed as a school facility, for example, whereas either its current use is discontinued, or through the nature of dynamic development that may occur on private sites, you can accommodate that use elsewhere. So we, I believe, are going to be working together to identify really the universe of those sites that we should start thinking about to get us past this rut of being stuck and saying we can't build anything new, because we can think better than that, and we have opportunities, I think, that will make that possible.
And when you say new ideas, new repurposing, you mean both publicly owned sites and also commercial sites?
Well, I'm thinking we need to look at the universe of publicly owned sites. We have lots of publicly owned sites in the county, across the county, which could theoretically, if placed on a map, provide you an opportunity to look at many areas that may meet the very needs that you're identifying as places where, well, what if we did this site differently? And you know, I think we've limited our thinking thus far to what's in your inventory and you know, what's in your inventory that you can get rid of, and we need a different kind of conversation, I think, as one potential answer to the question. Robert? Or Elizabeth, your light's on? Or you're just keeping it on in case you're needed? Okay, that's good. That's good. Tanya.
I just wanted to say thank you for that insight and foresight to work with us and look at countywide what public facilities we have that could be used for future builds and future growth for APS, because I agree with you that what we have and the way we've been looking at it has been very constraining. And as I don't know if I fully agree with all of the points that Mr. Goldstein made, but I do agree that we don't have places to build, we are short on money, and that the timeline for our build is longer than our rate of growth. And so having the collaboration with the county is very helpful. I do think that having a strong economy and recognizing that as you pointed out, Ms. Crystal, earlier, growing a community is a growing economy, which is a very healthy place to live. But we are looking at how that affects schools. And so managing that is important. And I understand density and growing and recognizing that we're an urban community. But what are the consequences of that growth to schools? Managing those consequences and making sure that that we're looking at it collaboratively, I think will be helpful in the future as we move and grow. So I just wanted to appreciate what you stated, Mr. Dorsey, at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry. Dr. Cannon.
Yes, I appreciate the question, and Mr. Dorsey, I very much appreciate hearing your response and the ideas you have about collaboration. And I had wanted to build off the question I asked earlier to talk about JFAC, and I think this is a nice segue into a conversation about how we could use JFAC for this process as well. So, but building off my question first, which was about how we now have, assuming the adjustments that will take place, we now have a common understanding about the 10-year horizon. JFAC, of course, is a long-term visioning body, and the kinds of projects you might be mentioning are really potentially much longer term. And what I think would be a wonderful next step, understanding that there are more urgent tasks, over the next few months, is to get a better picture of the long-term needs for APS. So, for example, you saw those kindergarten classes, and the projections are increasing. After the 10-year horizon, those kids are going to be in middle school and then high school. So while we're looking at a number of elementary schools and middle schools, again, with adjustments in our 10-year horizon, the truth is, in the long term, there's a list of some number of schools at every level. What would be wonderful is if we finally agreed on something about, with the idea being, of course, with our staff telling us what that horizon is and what those needs would be. Our job is to understand the flow and, what we need to do year to year, but that long-term plan, we just need to know that general idea. Do we need a high school in the next 20 years or something like that? For us to agree on that and then have JFAC and our staff working on those kinds of needs, I think would be extremely productive.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. DeFerranti.
Having come into this initially through the CIP on your side when I was with the budget committee, I feel pretty attuned to the concerns that you guys have raised. And I guess for me, from afar, the last month, the relatively new discussion regarding building up a little bit on elementary schools seems like a partial, in addition to the public facilities that were identified, that seems like a part of an effort to address the capacity needs. So at least that's what occurred to me when you mentioned with your question. And then I think, it just over and over again, I kind of am attuned to the 2 to 6 year horizon in addition to the 10-year horizon, because the difficulty of opening a school, you guys have done it again and again, but I just feel like sometimes folks can get really concerned about the 15-year horizon, whereas I'm really like the 2 to 6 year horizon is attractive to me as that is a component, though not the majority of what JFAC could be doing, and I feel like we have more confidence interval certainty about what will happen in that time frame. So that's just my perspective.
Thank you. Ms. Garvey.
Okay. So I just want to emphasize what our chair said. I mean, I think our staffs are working together. We are really prepared to, look at everything we've got and try to work it out. It used to be like that, but it is now, so we're going to work together on it. And then I feel like I'm a one-note Johnny sometimes, or I just say the same thing over and over again, so I'll say it again. I've been saying it for 25 years, that you all probably know where I'm heading. I mean, and I keep seeing it. So when I came on this school board, we had horrible crowding in the southern part of the county, and it wasn't so bad up north, so we had to build down here, and then we fixed that, and then suddenly, oh my God, it's crowded up there, and then we move up there, and then all of a sudden this school's got a room, and the kids are up there, and what are we gonna do? I mean, the problem is that buildings are static, and populations keep moving, changing, neighborhood, and you get the cycles, the life cycles. So at some point, while we're doing all of this long-term planning for buildings and bricks and mortar, where we're going to put them, I think it'd be really good to think of another way to get children into buildings, which frankly we already do with a lot of our choice buildings. And of course, transportation is part of it. But I just really encourage that because, we want to have a broad discussion, and that's not our bailiwick. I'm happy to help you with it, and I'm sure it will take time because it's sort of so different, but this factor change, I mean, I've been through a lot of boundary changes, and I feel your pain. It's really hard. It's like a divorce every time. If we could come up to a way, which some of our choice schools have, your child is in there, and then you don't have to worry about that. Your child goes through there. But other kids come in, and you can balance out population. So I think it's done some places. It's really different. But while we're if we're doing big picture thinking and planning ahead a lot, let's plan to maybe get children into a building not the way we've been doing it since the 1900s. So
Not going to put you on the spot, but anybody want to respond to that?
I'm happy to respond to that. I appreciate the out-of-the-box thinking and being creative about looking at how we manage our population growth. I think that our biggest challenge really is transportation and the infrastructure in Arlington County. And the truth is, we are a thoroughfare for our surrounding region. So until we can get a hold of our transportation challenges here in the infrastructure, in managing traffic and how we're growing, like when they put the HOV piece on 66, that had a huge impact on Arlington County. In the morning, I'm sure everyone's noticed it, their commute is very different than it was just 5 years ago, at a time. And so that has affected, our bus routes. And so when we look at transportation, if we wanted to go another way of managing our boundaries, which I think we would have to have a community discussion on. I think that it could be looked at, but it would be a process. We really have to recognize that we do have transportation challenges in transportation and financially as well. I mean, we don't have parking for buses as it is. There's a lot of other factors that come into play. So I just put that out there that if we are going to go that route, it really has to be a county and school board, from my perspective as one board member, a county and school board discussion that involves transportation, infrastructure, and budget.
absolutely.
And so, we maybe need to look at a long-term plan on how to engage the community where it's a joint discussion on this work, because it can't just be on the schools if we're looking at really changing it. That would be my perspective.
Ms. Crystal.
Yeah, I'm going to start by inviting all interested members of the school board to come with us to a Northern Virginia Transportation Commission meeting on Thursday. I love your point. I mean, it absolutely is it's such a regional issue, the idea of transportation. And the other thing that I think that really illustrates is there's such an attractive idea that we could somehow stop growing in this community. And this is a little bit what I was alluding to earlier, right? That we, like Arlington the way it is, we could finally get a handle on our student population, and there wouldn't be any more traffic, and we could keep everything just the way it is. And we know that that's fallacy, right? For a great example is the one that you were just indicating, which is if we pull up the drawbridge in Arlington County, that means folks are going to live in Woodbridge and commute right on through and actually exacerbate our transportation challenges rather than living somewhere where they can avail themselves of transit alternatives like we offer in Arlington. To say nothing of the impact on the affordability of this community if we say that we're going to stop allowing the infrastructure of housing to grow to meet the demand. So it's a great example. And I think a great reminder that as we are all working flat out to address these regional transportation issues, there's a great opportunity for sharing that and continuing to collaborate. I think back to Dr. Cannon's question about, what is the long-term horizon for JFAC? I'm so excited about this idea. I think that generally speaking, although it is sometimes painful, especially in years when we were resource constrained like our last CIP, generally speaking, the CIP is a decent process for kind of muddling through, here's what the school's needs are, here's how many schools we can expect in the next few years, here's at least geographically, if not a site specific, where you intend for them to go. That's also been a time I know that you guys have shared some thoughts about what the programs or the amenities at those buildings might be. The question is, what about the 30-year time horizon? And I think being able to have that conversation could potentially bring a lot of confidence to the community that, again, it's an attractive, but I would argue fallacy to suggest there's ever going to be a day where we say the last new student has entered, right? Everything is, no more growth from here on out. So absent that, let's think about how we're going to grow over the next 30 years. I really appreciate your point about could we calibrate somewhat on over 30 years of growth? How many secondary campuses does that look like? How many elementary school campuses does that look like? We're probably not going to make exciting decisions, right, for 30 years out from now. But I think the opportunity to pair that type of work with the inventory that Chairman Dorsey was mentioning, right? We know there are a couple of dozen sites around the county in public ownership now. It is absolutely not true that we are out of places to put schools in Arlington County. And I think we know, we've all seen it on the county quote unquote side, as you have on the school side, there's such a reaction to the idea that a school is coming here in 6 years. And I think really the conversation we should all be having is every neighborhood is going to be part of this conversation over the next 30 years. The question is when? How do we mitigate the impacts and maximize the benefits of having a new school facility co-located with your senior center, for example? And being able to talk on a 30-year time horizon maybe could help us get out of that pushback community by community, because the point is we're all in this together. Every neighborhood is going to be experiencing the benefits and mitigating the drawbacks of having more community facilities located. So I'm very excited about that work. I know it's a shame Mr. Gushel isn't here, because along with Mr. DeFranti, he's been doing fabulous work with the JFAC and with you both as well. Yeah. And so I think we are on the precipice of being able to do it. And I think it's going to be a really healthy way to have that conversation about how we are going to grow over the next few decades.
Ms. O'Grady.
Thank you. I wanted to back up and have back up to that conversation about transportation and just acknowledge and thank you for your work to help us pilot an art bus opportunity for some of our high schoolers, I should say. And I think that is important work, because as we continue to grow, and we do have a limited number of buses, people we can hire to drive the buses. I think that it is a great opportunity for us to collaborate and potentially grow this opportunity for our students to get off of yellow buses and onto art buses. Of course, that is going to be constrained by the current bus routes that we have, because not every bus route can get to every student, or at least is easily accessible to every student. But if we continue to look at this, there may be a possibility where we can figure out how to work together to expand those opportunities, not just for our students to be able to access a broader art bus system, but potentially also for our residents as well. So if we can continue to look at that, that may give us the opportunity to access some of those yellow buses for some of our younger students, and give us more opportunity for students to have greater choices as we continue to grow.
So I'll throw out a question. As we rightly are concerned about ensuring that we have adequate facilities for the number of students we expect, and we realize that the longer our outlook, the less precise our forecasts or our projections can be. Are we also reserving enough space, and this is primarily a question for the APS side, to think about potential changes in the delivery of education that might impact these numbers? And I'm not here to suggest any ones over the others, but as we see opportunities for regional collaboration on potential STEM facilities, for example, as part of the Virginia Tech expansion in Potomac Yards area, or more specialized education, is that anything that ever factors into the planning process for figuring out what our capacity needs are going to be? Some level, as Mr. Ruiz and Ms. Hardy, explained to us, you have to make certain assumptions moving forward, which may or may not be based on reality. So I know are we making any instructional assumptions that give us alternate scenarios about the number of seats that we might need in the future.
So a couple of comments that I could make. One is from the facility side. We do try to keep in mind that our buildings need to be designed to be flexible enough to adjust to whatever the learning needs to be in that environment. So I think that is something that facilities and operation does in fact keep in mind. The instructional aspect, I think, is part of the journey that we're on now. So one of the things we're looking at, and it's aligning to the state directive, K-12 profile level graduate, really speaks to looking at multiple pathways for student learning. And when we look at student learning, we want to be able to be responsive to what the future needs may be. And so STEM would be an example of that. And we're looking at areas that are indicative of what the future is saying we need. So we have programs that are already responsive to that in a number of different ways. Having students have access to multiple languages. The IB immersion would be an example of that. So we have some programs that are indicative of what we're going to need in the future and are in fact responsive to that pathway. And then we have some programs that we would be considering in response to what the future needs may be. So we are constantly engaging conversation with the Department of Teaching and Learning around that. But I think that's one aspect of being responsive to future needs. I think there's another that has to do with facilities. And we want our facilities to remain flexible enough to respond to those needs.
Yeah. Thank you. Chair Talento?
Yeah, I'm happy to just add to that in regards to her mention of the profile of a graduate. They do talk about internships and externships and, allowing our students to have more workforce experience. So from our capacity perspective in that regard that you brought up, there could be in the future perhaps less use of full-time use in our buildings. If one of our high schools right now offers early classes. So it's called zero period. I think maybe 2 of them do. And so then it stretches the use of them. So are there ways, but for us to look, at least since I've been on the board, for us to look at it in a long term, we can't predict what that will look like once it's fully implemented. I was reading the minutes or the notes from the Virginia School Board Association on the state board meeting that they recently had. And they just adopted the senior capstone project, or working, I think it was up for information, can't remember the action. But it talks about, what that would look like for the profile of graduate and our seniors in the workforce. But a capstone project could be in school, right? And it says something like capstone project and then experiential experience, like an experiential work. Basically, I interpret it as an internship. So depending on how our schools choose to evolve that part of the profile of the graduate could have an impact on capacity, but I don't think that we can consider that now for the same reasons that Ms. Garvey was saying. We anticipate that our high rises will at some point hold more families, but we can't look at the numbers now that way because we don't know yet if that's the trend. And so we just don't know yet in how the profile graduate will roll out statewide or in APS. Right now we have the work experience at the high schools for 4th quarter, and Wakefield is capstone project, so they're different in all the high schools. So just to answer that part of your question.
Yeah, it's just so interesting. At some level, we have to become adept at, this facilities planning based on current assumptions while also being adaptive and maybe even shaping future trends of how we're delivering services. There are a number of things that I have no idea whether they will happen, but it's reasonable that they could. Football could decline in popularity, freeing up the opportunity to maybe at a school or two significantly repurpose space that's devoted to one use to some other space. We can all speculate as to what could happen and who knows what will, but some of it probably will over time on our 30-year planning horizon, and other things that we can't yet think of, and figuring out how to incorporate that all is a challenge. Ms. Crystal.
Yeah, I just wanted to suggest, I think you're right, and I think it's going to be really messy, and I think a great example of that is the process that we're going through with the Career Center Working Group and the Career Center Building Level Planning Committee. I was just saying with Ms. Garvey earlier that I actually think on a case-by-case basis, APS is doing some of the best work I've seen in my time working in education on thinking about what the campus of the future, at least the secondary level, looks like. When we envision a significant number of these students are going to spend a significant amount of their day off-site. But we have also seen the absolute unavoidable challenge of communicating about that. And I have sat in these endless meetings where we listen. There's so many community members that are like, I don't understand what you mean when you say you don't know how many kids are going to be here at 2 p.m. on a Thursday, right? But the answer is between the PEP program, which has students off-site, right? The Arlington Tech program, the Career Center are going to have kids off-site doing internships. What a given student is doing at 2 p.m. on a Thursday is going to vary, and that does affect the number of students on site. And that is actually a good thing. It doesn't mean, that we don't have any idea about what the school facility needs to be, but there is going to be some real messiness in realizing that future. And so, to the extent that we can be partners in trying to communicate it and really helping all of us understand what it means to design a facility of the future, when it means, this is a very data-driven community, and we're not always going to have the answers if we're going to be flexible and rising to meet this opportunity of the future.
All right, Ms. O'Grady.
And also helping us identify our business leaders who will give our students internships and other opportunities off campus. That's a great way we can definitely partner. Another area I thought we might be able to partner in is looking at preschool. These numbers and projections of our growth do not indicate any additional growth in pre-K enrollment. And when I first got involved in APS as an advocate, I saw us really invest in pre-K. And it's important for us to talk about investing in pre-K because we both share a concern about equity and ensuring that all children have access to excellence. And one of the best ways to ensure that we don't have opportunity gaps is to give students the early start of education. And then we don't have to mitigate opportunity gaps on the end. And so as we're looking at growth, whether or not those numbers will stay the same or decline a little bit in the future, this still does not show any growth for pre-K as we still continue to grow. So one of the things I've been asking our own APS staff is what percentage growth in pre-K should we be at based on the overall growth of our student population. And when we take a look at that, we may have some challenges, and where if we want to add commensurate growth for pre-K, where we're going to put those students. And I think that's something maybe we can be talking about because that can help us with our equity. It can help us with eliminating the opportunity gap. And whether you have money or not in this county, so many people are looking for pre-K opportunities, and sometimes they're hard to find.
Okay. Thank you.
Ms. Van Doren, maybe? I'm good.
She's good.
Okay.
Ms. Garvey.
Yeah, thank you. So just looking at slides 23, 24, and 25, I'm struck. I know, there's crowding in their trailers, but you've been doing a pretty good job kind of keeping up in a way. Thank you. I mean, and I often tell people, the worst thing the worst thing for a community is to overbuild. So you have, which I've read about, they build brand new high schools and there's nobody in the high school. That's one of the worst things you can do financially. But I was thinking, just as before I was talking about with the boundaries, that we're already kind of doing it with some of our schools. The other thing I realized is, so the HB Woodlawn model, you're mixing a middle school and a high school. And so the kids can go back and forth. And my older daughter particularly, that was a great model for her. It really improved the education she had. So looking at the fact that you've got excess capacity at the high school level for some time here, a little bit, and then you've got other things. I mean, another model to think about is one that we also still have here where you maybe don't have middle schools are all by themselves, high schools, and elementary school. Maybe there's a way to have a bit of a campus. And you've got that, of course, with Kenmore and Crown Springs. So there's a lot there, and I just compliment you to what you're doing. And I think actually there's so many different new ways of doing. There's so many old ways that could be tweaked to really kind of help the school system balance things out that we're really already doing here, which of course helps people get a little buy-in because they realize, oh, we're doing it. It actually works well. So a lot of challenges ahead, but I think we're up to it. And I just want to compliment you on. I mean, I think it always feels dicey. We're like just barely there, but we're managing it, I think. So thank you.
I think we're ready for last words, and I'll just say briefly, as we think about, enrollment challenges, I think we are demonstrating to our community that we are past the time where we pass the baton back and forth as to whose responsibility is it to work on these issues. It is our collective responsibility, and the work that Robert and Elizabeth have done, are doing, and will do is really important, getting as precise as we possibly can with the limitations of data, but we know that that's not the entirety of the answer, and it's up to us to figure out how to collaboratively work together to give you the space to pursue the direction and policy and how to deliver instruction while we are your land use partners in making it work. And so to that end, we were happy to develop at least a number of sites that we want you to think about and incorporate into your thinking so that it can better help you figure out how to plan the foreseeable future, and our conversation just will continue in terms of how we achieve what are our mutual goals of ensuring that every student who is enrolled in an Arlington public school gets the best education that we can reasonably offer from a policy and planning and guidance and instruction perspective. So thank you. Thank you for partnership to date, continued partnership, and have a lot of confidence as to what we'll be able to do moving forward. Ms.
I just want
Flento.
to thank you for having us and for having this conversation, and I would just add foreseeable and unforeseeable future, as we discussed today, because there is a part of our future that we don't know what it will hold, but what we're talking about, the collaboration, will play into that part as well. And I speak on behalf of the board, we're excited that we are working with the county and collaborating in this new work, managing our growth, because if we can manage our growth, then we can truly focus on education, which is what we're really in the business of, is delivering high-quality education. And it would be great to know that we have a strong system ahead of us, so that then we can really focus on the instruction that we're providing in our community. So thank you for having us and for this conversation. And thank you.